Hi, I'm Jessica Beha, and I'm one of the prevention education specialists with Great Rivers Regional System for Addiction Care. And we are continuing with our This Is My Story series. And today we have Jon. Jon has agreed to tell his story today. We actually got Jon's name from another person who told their story, Terry. And so we want to thank Terry for sending Jon our way. And we want to thank you in advance, Jon, for telling your story. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
So, my name's Jon. I am a second generation West Virginian, born and raised in Morgantown. I am the youngest of five children. Try to give a little background. Upbringing wasn't really so horrible. However, it didn't go unscathed either. I was molested by a family member in my young age, and it kind of changed the way I looked at life and looked at what I could say to the outside world, and made me feel different. I think is the easiest way for me to frame it is just not knowing how to be maybe look at risk a little differently in life. Definitely challenged relationships, and probably still challenges relationships up until today, because that was a pretty impactful piece of my childhood. To tell my story means to me to share hope and not just to share suffering. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my active use, but I'm going to talk more about my recovery, because I'm not defined by the worst moments of my life. I'm defined by who I am today. To continue going on, adolescence, around the age of 13, my dad was diagnosed with adenoid cystic carcinoma, which is a very rare type of cancer that started behind his tongue and metastasized down into his lungs. So the part of your adolescence where you should be kind of joyous and free and rambunctious turned into a stage of rebellion and angst and hate and dread. And it's not coincidental that very quickly between my dad's diagnosis, that the first time I really ingested chemicals. And I'm going to say dope in general, because for me, it's all dope. It doesn't matter if it comes in a bottle or a blunt, or a needle or straw. It's all dope. It all robs me of everything. It all robs me of everything. I liked it. I like the freedom. I like the escape. I like the ability to compartmentalize. Um, you know, I think the biggest misnomer is that drugs are bad. Drugs are really fucking good. The problem with drugs is, for people like me, they destroy your life. And they do it so succinctly and so intelligently. It's kind of like digging a hole. It's kind of like being that guy that digs a hole and can't pay attention to how deep he's in the hole. And by the time he looks up and realizes he's in the hole, it's too late. You can't get out by yourself, and you're struggling, and you're tired, and you're worn down. I also had a lot of migraines through my adolescence, and really into early adulthood. And like any good individual like myself with a substance use disorder, I'm pretty good at manipulation. I actually am very good. I honestly think that the people in active use oftentimes should get honorary PhDs from their local higher level of education, because that's how good we are. I could talk to a doctor, skirt around it. By the 30-minute appointment, I was walking out with whatever substance I wanted when I walked into that room. And it's not that doctors are dumb, it's that we have all the time in the world to know how to frame stuff and how to say it and how to exacerbate our symptoms and really project this need for this medication. And for me, it was anything but illicit use. I was certainly not taken as prescribed, unless they added a couple ones to the number of how many to take every 4 to 6 hours. That was not me. I did not take medication as prescribed. The problem with it is once I got to pain medication, I realized that it treated more than physical pain. It treated emotional pain. And I had a lot of emotional pain, from the molestation to the grief of starting to see my father head towards his demise in life. That you can imagine a family of five is dysfunctional. My family's probably equally as dysfunctional as most, if not more. We have different versions in my mind of process addictions that go on in life. My dad had his, my mom was ultra religious. My sister had eating disorder parts of her life. I have a brother that's a workaholic, is a physician. I have a brother that's still in active addiction right now and living outside of the Pittsburgh area. And I have one brother that is just, he definitely parties, but he never got the gene, in my opinion, that I got. His limbic system acted slightly different than mine did. So if you progress, it went from euphoria and chasing this escape to needing this escape. And I remember the first time I felt physical withdrawal symptoms, and I didn't really comprehend what they were. It felt like the flu. It felt like agony, misery, discontent. And if you're watching my story, I'd tell you to close your eyes for a minute and imagine you have the worst flu you've ever had, ever in your entire life. And if I said to you, I can give you an aspirin, and if you take this aspirin, you're going to immediately feel normal again, would you take it? And I think any sensible person would say yes. Welcome to what it feels like to have opiate addiction, to have an opiate use disorder. It's very similar to that. It's very similar to this need. It's not so much I'm yearning to get high. No, don't get me wrong. That was the intent, but it's fleeting. You don't normally have the opportunity to really get euphoria. Most of the time, your behaving and your mannerisms are a means to avoid pain, to avoid that withdrawal. And I think that most people think, oh, that those, and I hate to use stigmatizing words, but they're used. Those junkies out there, they're just destroying themselves. What they're trying to do is go out and stay well, and they don't know how to do it, and they're in that hole. And we have a choice. We can we can put them down and chastise them and tell them this is their fault and they made a decision, and that addiction's not a disease, it's a choice. And you can leave them in that hole, or you can have compassion and you can help them, and you can treat them like another human being. And I know I work with families in addiction. That's what I've done for years now. I know there's a lot of pain and shame and stigma and grief that comes from the family's end and not just from individuals like me. But I can tell you, it took love to get me out of that hole. It took caring. It took compassion. It took people giving me a second chance I didn't fucking deserve for me to get out of that hole. To keep moving on, that the most of my 20s, I started to attend WVU. That didn't go so well. I mean, it didn't go so horribly, but you kind of have to show up for class and, study and be responsible. And all those things, I had no idea what the fuck they meant. Those were things that, class, so it is what it is. And I was a chef, and to some extent, I still am a chef now, although it's not my 9 to 5. And that is the perfect breeding ground for me to continue to use. You work really hard. It's very, very intense work. You're cooking in this period of time where people eat from 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock, and you work so hard throughout that day that you can party, you can cut loose. You just work so damn hard, and it allowed me to have a social support network around me that didn't make me look odd. It didn't make it abnormal. It was what was expected. A lot of restaurants even will give you shift drinks at the end of the night. Like, hey, you worked so hard. Here's some chemicals. Go have fun now. So you can go repeat it all over again. And that's what my 20s looked like. It looked like relationships that were extremely maladaptive, that were visceral at times, that included arguments and throwing things, and uh, habitual drug use on both parties, because no normal chick was ever going to want to date me. And I would tell you now, my wife's not normal. My wife had a brother that lost his life to an opiate addiction. I don't think that's coincidental. I don't think that I found a woman that I ended up marrying that had addiction in her life and I had addiction in mine. Hers was a little different than my story. However, I think I'm attracted to people that she'd hate this. I think I'm attracted to people that are broken like metal to magnets. And I think that includes today and why I find myself where I'm at. The end of my addiction wasn't so great. I had lost jobs, lost friends, selling drugs, not being the version of a person that I wanted to be. I had taken my morals and values and self-respect and threw it out the window. There was very few things I wouldn't do, or people I wouldn't manipulate, or people I wouldn't hurt to get what I thought I needed. I was fearful, like dreadfully fearful of what recovery was going to look like. I thought you were going to take away the best parts of my life and leave me with this existence that just wasn't enjoyable, that was taking away from life, like the joy. And I thought it was all going to be mundane and miserable, and I was going to be discontent. And I mean, like not drink, not use drugs. I couldn't imagine an existence like that. So one night in January of 2012, I got into a fight with my now wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, and she had enough, and she kicked me out. And I was on a cocktail of feel-good chemicals, although I probably didn't feel so good at that moment. The great part about this is I took a class of drugs called benzos along with opioids at that moment. So I don't really remember all of this. I tell you this story because the story comes back to me in kinds of bits and pieces and pictures in my mind, but not necessarily a clear, cohesive story. I'd like to be honest here that there may be some slight inaccuracies in my story because it's a little bit clouded when you have 20 years of chemical use. But for me, what I remember is getting kicked out and going up a hill to a local person's house that I sold drugs to. And I had a fair amount of drugs at that particular time, of dope. And instead of making it in his house, I passed out in a snowbank outside. And early the next morning, as the sun was rising, the guy came out. I don't know what he was doing, but he saw me and asked me to come into his home, and woke me up. And this wasn't the type of individual that I regularly engage with. So this was a means to an end. This was somebody that was not in what I would deem as my normal social network. This person was way on the outskirts, probably on the outskirts of society too. The way he lived, the way he carried himself, his proclivities were just different than what I would normally associate with. However, I had no place to go. My family had cut me off. My girlfriend had kicked me out, and I lived on this individual's couch for a couple days. And I sold drugs to him, and I did drugs. And I woke up at 31 watching, I don't know, some bullshit TV show, and had I don't know if you want to call it an epiphany, or just had like a moment of self-reflection, this moment of clarity. Like, you're 31. Is this really what you want to do with the rest of your life? Do you there's not much left for you. You're either gonna fucking get on the horse and you're gonna do something different, or you're gonna die. And to tell you the truth, death didn't sound so bad. There was a lot of pain, and there was a lot of misery, and there was a lot of angst, and I'm unemployed, and I don't have a girlfriend, and I don't have anything that is mine. Like, I could take my possessions and put them in a garbage bag. And I've worked years and decades of my life, and I don't have family that I believed at that point loved me. And I looked around and said, what do I have to show for 31 years? And that's a pretty miserable feeling, to look around and make the determination that after 31 years, you got nothing. You have nothing and no one. And I would love to sit here and tell you, I was like, yeah, let's go get into recovery. No, there was a long time before that I thought about, is death the easier, softer way, the way I should go, because it would provide me that immediate relief. See, for people like me, instant gratification is everything. That's why substances are so great, because in a moment's notice, in a puff, in a snort, in a swallow, and sticking something under my tongue, I can change the way I feel immediately. That stuff doesn't go away. Neither do the feelings. You know, despite what substances you may have done in your life, or haven't done, or behaviors you've done, what's not unique about you is, you know what joy is, and you know what happiness is, but you also know what pain is, and sadness and misery. And for people like me, there's a lot of the latter and not as much of the former as we would like. So on that couch that was grotesque, that I didn't shower for 3 or 4 days, that, you know, I probably ate a meal once every 48 hours, and only because, you know, the guy was like, hey, you haven't eaten in 2 days, maybe try to put something in your stomach. I made a decision I couldn't take it anymore. And I'm too much of a pussy to kill myself. So my other choice was to reach out and ask for help. And you know, in the fog of this, my wife would tell you that she recommended it. I have no recollection of her ever remembering me going to treatment, but I called a local licensed behavioral health center in my part of the state, and they made me go to the hospital and get blood work done. And I still remember kind of lying to the physicians there, because I thought if I told them I did a little bit more, they'd make myself a little bit more comfortable, and then they wanted to keep me in the hospital. And I was like, no, I kind of lied. I overdid some of the substances that I told you I used. And they finally let me go to a crisis unit. And in that crisis unit, there were a couple things that I observed and that helped me. One was, it was the first time in many years of my life I worried about me. And I know that sounds fucking weird, because you know, individuals with substance use disorder are often selfish and self-absorbed, but we don't worry about us. We worry about our drug. That's what we're after. We're not concerned with our health and wellness and how we feel and how we think. We're in search of the next fix and the next capacity to not have to feel. And I mean, no disrespect to professionals. I'm in a master's in rehabilitation and clinical mental health program at WVU right now. So I appreciate professionals. You guys have saved my life too. But there was a lady at that treatment center that had 7 years at that crisis unit. And of all the people that I interfaced with during that 7, 10, 11 days, I don't exactly remember, she was the most impactful to me. You know, she believed in me when I didn't deserve to be believed in. You know, when I was bitching, whining, and moaning about the withdrawal symptoms, because trust me, I can, if I close my eyes and think for a minute, I can go back. And that's not yesterday, that's years ago. I can go back and feel those feelings of where I was in those days. And she told me to just fucking do it. And, you know, I've cussed a little on this and I apologize, but you know, that's who I am. When I tell my story, I like to be genuine and not bullshit, because I feel like when I'm watching stuff, I can tell what's genuine and what's disingenuous, and I don't want to be disingenuous. That's not who I am today, and I hope that I'm portraying that's not who I would be with people in my life today. Um, and I did it. I will tell you that I fought for a 28-day treatment center. So when I initially went to turn my paperwork in to get into this crisis unit, they made some sort of vague description that they would take my paperwork to the 28-day because that wasn't guaranteed to you. And then about 4 days into my detox, they told me I wasn't getting to bed. And for anyone that knows me, I'm one of the most stubborn individuals you'll ever meet. And if I want something, if I really want something, there's not a goddamn thing stopping me from getting it. So I raised holy hell for 24 hours at that detox center. And I do mean holy hell, because the truth of the matter is I was fighting for my very life. I was truly fighting because I knew if I left that place and I went back to where I wasn't making it a day without putting drugs back in my system. I wasn't ready for that shit. I needed time away. And sometimes it was time away from friends. Everyone always laughs at this. When I talked about selling drugs, I sold drugs with an Indian dude. So me and this Indian dude drove around Morgantown. So a ginger and an Indian thinking we're on incognito, flipping dope all over Morgantown. We really thought we were slick. And when I was entering recovery, I had to grieve that relationship. I spent more time with that dude in my life than I probably had anybody else, including my family and my girlfriend. And I had to grieve that because I knew if I went back to that relationship that he wasn't ready to take the steps that I was ready to take. And I went. I raised that so much holy hell in that detox facility that the next morning I was woken up and told, hey, you have somebody on the phone to talk to you. And her name was Dawn, and she was a trucker that now worked at a treatment center, a 28-day treatment center. And she sounded like a trucker. She was no bullshit. She tried to scare you when you were on the phone. But I love that lady. And I truly do love that lady because she gave me what I needed. And I don't mean the 28-day bed. She gave me some harsh love. She gave me that, hey, I'm going to give you a chance, but your rope was so goddamn short that just come down here and act a fool. Just for one day, act a fool. Because there's people dying for this bed. There's people dying to have something that they call recovery and another day in their life. And I took that challenge. And when I took that challenge, I went to that place and I hated it. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing nice about the rehab, or at least there wasn't anything real nice about the rehab I went to. I've sent a couple people to some really nice rehabs and I'm sure there was something nice with, but for me, it wasn't the greatest thing. It was a little twin bed that was quasi plastic with not so nice pillow and a roommate that stunk and snored. And I hadn't slept through the night it took me about 26 days to get a full night's sleep. So what it did is it introduced me to some wonderful people. It introduced me to some people in there that, again, gave a shit. It introduced me to some people that 9 years later I still talk to. And that's a pretty amazing sort of thing, that this 1 month of your life could impact you so much that it's going to have lasting relationships that last 9 years. But the greatest gift it gave me, the greatest thing that it possibly could do for me, is it introduced me to 12-step meetings. And I went to those 12-step meetings. And for the first time in maybe 20 years, I felt connected. I felt like I was home. And I don't know how to articulate that, even though people will tell me I use big words and have a large vocabulary. Probably accurate, probably more arrogant. But, I don't have the words to articulate. You can't go anywhere else and say, I'd like to choke my old lady, and people don't give you crazy looks. There, they kind of nod their head and smile because, they probably wanted to choke their old lady last night. That's kind of how that meeting is. And people think that it's just this bitch fest where everyone go and whine and complain about their life. And don't get me wrong, there's some of that shit that goes on. But they do that because they don't want to be a tea kettle. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people in life have ways to release. For us, we're a tea kettle. Unless we take the top off and find a way to release some of our steam, it boils up until we whistle. And when we whistle, we do the most unscrupulous, maladaptive, harmful, egotistical, visceral, hateful behavior to ourselves and to the people that we love the most. And I don't want to be a fucking tea kettle anymore. And these people truly love me before I love myself. You know, that one of the guys I met in those early days is my sponsor. And when I picked up 7 years of sobriety, he gave me my coin, and it's kind of a ritualistic thing that happens on your anniversary. And he told a story about who I was when I went into that treatment center. And they called me Know-It-All John way back then. And technically my name's Jonathan, but to give you a little insight, I was also in that treatment center with another Jonathan. So one of us had to choose a different name, and I chose John. And as you see on your screen, my name's still John. It was a rebirth in that place. It was a chance to do something different, but it wasn't a guarantee. While I was in that treatment center, I didn't know what I was going to do next. I truly didn't. Had no place to go. The relationship was still rocky with the girlfriend. My mom was living in San Diego, and I called and I talked to her. And I asked her if I could just stay in her house in Morgantown while she was in San Diego and give me some time to get a job and get on my feet. And she said, "I love you, but I can't." And that's pretty shitty to feel like, hey, look at me. I fucking got on my soapbox. I changed my whole life. I went to treatment. Guess what? My trash on the sidewalk, it wasn't clean. They're not impressed. Most people are not impressed that you have 35 days of sobriety. They said you should have never started using it in the first place. Well, let me tell you, that's 35 miracles, true miracles, that 35 days in a row, I didn't ingest any chemical. I didn't do anything that was self-harmful, except for maybe my thoughts. And she said no. And I had to scramble. She said, "You can't be at my house." Luckily, there were some people that would give me a hand up, and they got me an apartment for a month. It was kind of a conglomerate of family and my girlfriend. And however, she was considering buying a house, so I didn't want to sign a full lease. So I had about a month, and I was going to those 12-step meetings, and they weren't just telling me about recovery, they were showing me recovery. And I think that's the biggest misnomer of 12-step rooms. It's not a place I go and bitch. It's a place that I feel connected. It's a place that understands me and cares about me. But most importantly, they show me how to be different than who I am today. And it's not really very dogmatic. There's not a lot of religion in the 12-step fellowship that I participate in. It's more of spiritual principles, and I think the easiest way to translate that to more of a religious standpoint is kind of fruits of the spirit. If you're an Old Testament sort of person, it's love, joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, temperance. You know, it's being meek, it's having compassion, it's showing love. It's teaching me how to not just behave with my addiction, but more importantly, it's teaching me how to behave with you, because I don't know how to behave with you. I feel awkward. Put me in a button-up shirt, and I'm like, I feel like this is so disingenuous. This is not the person that I am. God damn it, why can't I just be me? And we always feel slightly on the outskirts, not accepted. And I say we, I should say me. I feel, because I don't want to generalize, you may not feel that way. It took me a long time to feel comfortable in my skin and to like me. I for decades shaved in the shower because I didn't want to see my face in a mirror as I shaved. Recovery, as stupid as this sounds, offered me the gift of being able to shave in a mirror instead of always having to do it by feel. It also gave me, the beginning part was a good 35 pounds. that I found while I was in rehab. Imagine that. You used to quit doing drugs and put down the proverbial spoon and pick up the fork. And that was me. The one good thing that comes out of that is I still do caterings and I'm still a chef, and I'll just pat my belly and say, never trust a skinny chef because they don't eat their own food. For me, I am who I am and I'm genuine and I love people. But I think it's important to talk about some miracles of recovery. And I think that's kind of where I'll go for the rest of my story, since this is my story. You should never give me this kind of stage. Uh, I talked about my mom not allowing me in her home, and that wasn't just to live, that was more to visit. um, you know 93% of communication is actually body language and not what comes out of their mouth. So when you go to your family's house and you see the women pull their purses a little closer to them, or they get up and they go to their room and all of a sudden they come back and their purse isn't there, or when you go into their dining room to get a drink, they follow you in there because they think you're up to something no good. This shit doesn't stop just because you jumped into a treatment center and get out and then starting to get into recovery. You change by, and I changed by demonstrating over a long period of time that my audio matched my video, that I was congruent, that when I said I was going to do something, I would do it. And those things weren't fucking easy. That was difficult. I had to learn things like budgeting, how to, get my credit out of the hole, how to have a relationship and not make it all about me. And that's both platonic and romantic. Um, and over time, I started to get trusted more. And there came a day where I was talking to my sponsor, and I was pretty miserable, even in recovery. And I had gotten this wonderful job that I'll talk about in a minute, and it kind of went away. And in that moment of my misery and my self-pity and me, wanting to throw that party for myself of woe is me and why aren't y'all paying attention, my mom called and she needed something. And so I drove out and I helped her with, I don't even remember what I helped her with, but I remember the end of the story. And as I'm leaving, she says, I'm going out of town. And I'm like, okay. And she said, and here's this. And she handed me a set of keys. And I was like, what is this for? And she said, there may be times that I need somebody to do something for me. There may be times that life makes it complicated for me to do things. And I want you to have these in case you ever need to get in. On the keychain was a butterfly. Now, odd or God, I can't really tell you, but I can tell you those keys weren't a set of keys to her house. Physically, they may have been, but metaphorically, they were freedom for me. They were acceptance for me. They were a demonstration of love. See, I believe love is an action word and not just bullshit you say out of your mouth because society says to do so. Love is a way of demonstrating. And those keys were a demonstration of love. And that, to me, is a miracle. I know you're probably thinking, well, she's your mom. Of course she's going to give you your keys. No, you should know this lady. She is not all there. So even her got this moment of clarity that was pretty fucking amazing. And then probably my favorite story, and if you've heard me talk before, you go ahead and skip this part because you've heard it before. I probably tell it anytime somebody asks me to tell a story. And this to me is the epitome of how magical recovery could be. So when I got out of treatment, I ended up working for a company that provided me as a custodian type individual at Ruby Hospital. So we did laundry and housekeeping and transport and setting with suicidal patients, which either is the best day of your life or not fun at all. Can't call it either way. And I was outside one day on a smoke break and saw a guy from a 12-step meeting. And he said, "Hey, I need some management. How much are they paying you there? I'd love to have you come over. We do custodial work for the athletic department, clean up after football games and basketball games and all that." And he said, "Go quit. I'll give you a job. I'll pay you a whole bunch more and you'll have to do less work." And, you know, if you know me, doing less work is at the top of I really appreciate that list. So I took the position and I don't even think I gave a 2 weeks notice. I think I gave him 1 week's notice and was over there working with him. And through that, we developed relationships. And the cool part about the 12-step fellowship is I found ways to have fun and enjoyment, fill up my cup. And one of those ways was a Friday night poker game. And we would all get together and, you know, there was money that flew around, but it wasn't anything crazy. You know, $10, you may leave with 50, think you're the best thing since, you know, the world existed because you won $50 off your friends one night. So at one of these, we're playing poker and my brother called. So as I told you, I have a workaholic brother. He's a palliative care physician. For you that don't know what palliative care is, it's end of life. For him, though, he is a special type of individual. He does pediatric and geriatric palliative care. So he does children and adults and pretty much everywhere in between. And he called me and he said, I have a girl with cystic fibrosis and we're trying to help her with a Make-A-Wish. You wouldn't happen to know how I could get connected with people at the WVU Coliseum, do you? And my boss was at the poker game that we're cleaning. So I'm able in, you know, a few sentences with my boss to be able to give him the name and number of a lady at the Coliseum. So the girl's Make-A-Wish was to see Luke Bryant, and he was coming in to do a concert the next day. Ripples in a pond, you know, you never know that little tiny thing that you do that's going to impact somebody's life so big. The next morning, my brother was in a van with Luke Bryant going to WVU Children's Hospital to talk to this girl. And that's pretty fucking cool. And if that was the end of the story, I would be happy, but it's not even close to the end of the fucking story. So that night at that concert, I was a manager and they put me in a particular spot. Like I'd never met this girl, I knew nothing about her, but they put me in a spot on kind of the separation between the top level and the lower level. And this is also where the wheelchair ramps are. Well, so to speak, they put me about 10 yards from where this little girl sat with her mom. And halfway through the concert, Luke Bryant stopped the concert and he flashed the light up on this little girl and he talked about how she was cute and was too shy to pinch his butt, although she wanted to. It was like this moment of setting in recovery now with a little bit of time put together and being able to like grasp a gift. Like how many fucking things had to go right that my brother had to call me at that poker game, that I had to be right beside the guy that had the number to the person, that Luke Bryant would even listen to this request and get in a car with my brother, that my boss would systematically place me in a location where I was 10 feet away or 20 feet away from this girl getting another piece of her dream met. And I was blessed in that night. And I realized that this was fucking recovery. This is those magic things that you hear about. And my magic isn't done yet. Again, that'd be fucking cool if that was the end of the story, but it's not. A couple years go by, I get asked by that treatment center that I was talking about in my local area I was asked by a home group, that this group, one of those 12-step groups, to come speak. And that treatment center that I went to, they brought their participants to this meeting, and it was in a church basement, and it was dark. And I told them the story that I told you, and I went on and finished my story. And as you can tell, I'm a talker. I like to blab. You know, people will say I like the sound of my own voice. It's probably not true. Maybe a little true. I don't know. But at the end of it, people come up and thank you and tell you how great your story was, and all the bullshit that boosts your ego, because I definitely need more ego boosting. And at the end of this girl comes up to me, and she's a blubbering mess, and she says that was my cousin. And I have no comprehension that she's talking about the little girl. None whatsoever. That story you told, that was my cousin. And she died like 2 weeks ago. And she died with a smile on her face, with a picture of Luke Bryant beside her bed. Now, to me, there's a reason for things. There's a reason we're interconnected. There's this reason that we get reminders throughout our life that we can change the world. I didn't change the world that day by answering that phone, but it's pretty fucking cool that that experience changed that girl's world. It's pretty cool that years later I tell the story and run into her cousin and provide her some solace and show her that recovery is possible. This girl's in a treatment center. She doesn't know miracles can happen. And she got to hear a fucking miracle that was part of her story that she didn't even know about. To me, that's what makes recovery amazing and practical. And I know I only have a few minutes left, but I'm going to finish on this. There's something called life on life's terms. It's this concept in especially 12-step recovery that says life isn't always going to go well. And it's not. About a year ago right now, I was about to be a father for a second time, and I went to an ultrasound, and the ultrasound was supposed to be between 16 and 20 weeks, and we were a little late, and they found out my baby was missing part of his brain and wouldn't make it. And I tell you this because I want to be realistic. Recovery isn't always fucking glowing. You don't just jump in and make everything wonderful. At times, things are difficult and challenging, and you still experience pain and grief and sorrow. Those were not the hardest days of my recovery. Those were the hardest fucking days of my life. Harder than putting my father in the ground in my early 20s, because it's something different when it's a part of you, when you have these goals and wishes and aspirations for something only to get it fucking torn away. And there was no rhyme or reason or thing I could point to of why I had to experience this. And I can only imagine what it was like for my wife and for my son. My other son. I have a 3-year-old too. He's a spitting image of me, and he's stubborn. And he's like the worst part of both me and my wife put together, and then given steroids or something. So to Liam that never made it here, you're still loved. You're still cared about. But life marches on, and joy has come. I've graduated from college since I've got into recovery. I'm in a master's program as a graduate assistant. I teach at WVU in their addiction studies minor as a professor. Professor Dower, I know, fucks me up as much as it does you, I promise. I have 9 years clean, or coming up on 9 years clean. I have sponsees and a sponsor and people that love me. I work in the field of treatment and addiction recovery. Uh, I'm blessed through the story of molestation and losing my father to cancer and losing a baby and destroying my whole life. I realize I'm blessed and I love and I'm loved. And most importantly, I'm lovable. And I think that's one of the most powerful things I can say. And for everybody that knows me and sees me at those 12-step rooms, know I always end the exact same way. Because there was a part of me that never got this and always yearned for it and needed it. So in case nobody else tells you today, I love you. Thank you.
Jon, thank you so much for telling your story. That was probably one of the most genuine stories I've heard, honestly. I just loved your ability to just be open and honest and just who you are. And you can still see the emotion on your face and mine as well. So I cry when other people cry. I can't help it. It's just one of those things. But I truly, truly appreciate you telling your story. And I am so happy that Terry sent you our way, and that our paths were able to cross. And so thank you so much for being, like I said, so genuine with telling your story. I loved, you had some amazing, amazing things. I didn't have my notebook close by, or else I probably would have written them down. The one thing I did write down, though, that you were talking about was when you were going to those 12-step meetings, you said they weren't just telling me about recovery, but they were showing me. And now you're getting to do the same thing. You're getting to show people that recovery is possible. And so I want to thank you again for telling your story. And if anybody out there has any questions for Jon and you're watching today and you would like to get in contact with him, please feel free to contact us at the Great Rivers page, or you can contact Jon directly. And we want to ask you to continue to be on the lookout for more of our This Is Our Story series. And if you or someone you know would like to tell your story, whether you're in recovery or maybe you're a family member of someone with a substance use disorder and you would like to tell your story, then please, please, please reach out to us at this Great Rivers page. We would love to have your story told. And like Jon said, this is your story. It's not my story, it's your story. And so we would love for you to tell your story. So thank you again, Jon, for telling your story. And we look forward to many more stories as the weeks come.
Thank you for having me.